Welcome to Chapter 2, where we are continuing to learn the basic pawn endgames in order to have confidence in all the basic pawn endgames. In the previous chapter, we talked about the A and H pawn, where it will be impossible to win if his king is facing us or just have reached the corner. In this case, we are talking about the pawns that are from the B file to the G file, so just accept the corner pawns. In this position, we can see that our king is facing his king. This is something called an opposition. In general, we need to win the opposition. It's a very important concept. We will need it in the pawn, and we will need it in the pawn endgame, and we will need it much more later in almost every endgame. It's a very important concept, so let's understand it first. What means an opposition? Opposition is the king facing the king. Okay, so what happens after that? In many cases, it's important for us to win that opposition. So just imagine two things are facing each other. The winner is the one who forces the other to move from his way. So it's like he went backward or left the facing of this opposition. So in this case, if black is the one that has to move, he will be the one who lost this opposition. It's white to move, then white is forced to move from the face of the king of the black, and he will be lost this opposition. Okay, does it really matter in this case? Let's see. The only thing to note in this case is that the king is in front of the pawn and has reached the 6th rank. This is very important concept, and we call this SWP, the standard winning position. So as you can guess, since it's a standard winning position, the one with the pawn will always win if he has reached this exact position. So if it's black to move, black will move right or left, and white will move in the opposite direction forward. So he moved this way, we're gonna move that way, and we will secure 1, 2, 3 squares. Whatever black does, we push, and we queen and win the endgame. Okay, what about the case where we have lost the opposition? When we have lost the opposition, it means it's our turn to move. Okay, how are we gonna move? We can move right or move left. In the case of the D pawn, this doesn't matter, so we can move right or left. If black moves against or the other side from us, we just move forward and we secure the queen and we win the game. So it will be wise for him to try to face us again, but we can push and he will move forward of the pawn and we will push again. And this position is a reciprocal zigzag, where if it's white to move, white will have to go behind his pawn and force a stalemate, and it will be a draw. But if it's a black to move, he will be able to move up and he will lose the game, as is the case here. He will move up and we can push the king and we support our queen. So going back to the position, we learned a very important concept. It's called the opposition. It didn't matter in this case, but it will matter in the next example, so don't forget it. This position is the king in front of the pawn on the 6th rank. The pawn is behind the king, and the black king is facing us. As we talked, the concept, the rule doesn't change from the B file to the G file. This should be again the SWP, the standard winning position. The only trick here is that with the B pawn or the G pawn, where we are close to the corner, we only win if we go to the A file or H file in the case of the G pawn. And it's very easy. We move, the king faces us, and we push. The king moves, and we go forward with the pawn. The king goes up, and we go forward, and we queen, and we win the game. What's the trick here? The trick here was that if you thought that is similar to the C, D, E, F pawns, then you say, okay, wherever I move, right or left, I should win. And here you might just win the game, where if black goes to the A7 square and it's your turn to move, you say, okay, we used to go forward with the king, and if he goes back, we used to push. But looking now, this is a stalemate, and it's like, what went wrong? Nothing went wrong, except that this is the exception with the B pawn, and you cannot go forward with the pawn. That's why you should remember the basic rule and be confident that this is winning, but in not that way. So you go back, and again you reach the position that we started with. We're still safe. It's second time repetition. Of course, if we repeat it 3 times, it will be a draw. And now we go as we started, and as shown in the start, we win this game. One more trick. If you went to the C6 square, which is not winning, but doesn't miss the win unless you continue with it. So king A7, and here the most horrible blunder that you can do is to push the pawn. And if you push the pawn, now there's no chance to go back to the winning position, because black will go to the A8 square. And now you cannot go forward because again it's a stalemate. So you have to push the pawn, but black will go to the B8 square. And this reciprocal zigzag we talked about before happened now, but unfortunately it is our turn to move, and we go to the B6 square, and it's a stalemate. So just go please to the A6 square. This position, if you look closely, we are defending. We have a pawn. We are faced with a pawn down position where black has the extra pawn. And if we look at the king positions, the king is not in front of the pawn as the previous case. And of course, the king is not on the third rank. All the positions with the king beside the pawn, or the king is behind the pawn, don't worry, we can defend that. Of course, if our king is very close, or facing his king, or facing the pawn. I'm not talking about the position where our king is far away. We will talk about this later. So in this case, we just face the pawn. He pushes us back. Here we can go backwards in any direction, but I will go in the correct way that we will need it later. If you made a mistake here, you can fix it, but later it will be impossible. You will see that in few moves. So let's go back facing the pawn. Black goes forward. We don't allow the black king to go in front of the pawn. We face the king. We force him to push, always to push his pawn in front of his king, and we block his pawn. He forces us back. We go back facing the pawn. He goes forward. We block again. He goes maybe from this way. We block, and now we reach the position where the mistake is unfixable. If we blunder here, we have no chance to get back in the game. So that's why we should go in front of the pawn again. wherever our opponent king goes, we face. So if he goes this way, we face the king. And in order to improve, he needs to check again the position with the reciprocal zigzag, and black has to support his pawn, and it's a stalemate. Even if he went, after we went back, he went from the other side, we face his king. He pushed, and we go in front of the pawn, and it's a draw. I talked about a lot of the mistake that is unfixable. If we go back, not in front of the pawn, like d1 or f1, here black will force the opposition that we talked about before. As you see, we are the ones forced to move from the king's way, and now, as you can see, the reciprocal zigzag is on us, and we have to go up, and the queen will promote, and we will lose the game. One trick I sometimes used to try with the lower rated is that after the king goes back correctly, I try to move to the right or the left square. And sometimes people blunder here, and they think that I went here, and they just go to the d1 square immediately. But if you notice here, black didn't make any push or try of improvements. That's why the correct move is just to go back and repeat the position. The mistake that happens sometimes is that white does not understand that black did nothing, and he's not facing the king. If you notice here, there is no opposition. There is two squares. In order to have an opposition, there should be one square between the king. And now black is the one who's going to force the opposition and win the game. So this was the concept of the king beside or behind the pawn. The defender side can draw this game easily if he knows the basics. This is a case similar to the case we saw at first, where the opponent king is in front of his pawn, and those are the dangerous positions, and this is where the opposite position really matters. The king of black is not on the third rank, so this is not the standard winning position. Let's not forget that. Okay, so what does matter here? It does matter who has to move. If white has to move, this means that white has lost the opposition and he will lose the game. If black has lost, or if black has to move, black has lost the opposition, and of course he will not lose, so it will be a draw. So in this case, if it's white to move, wherever we move, black will go forward against or on the other side of our king. And if we go back, he can just put his king on the third rank and push the pawn. And as you saw before, it's the standard winning position, and you should know by now that's already lost, no chance to do anything. And even if you go up, check, king goes back, and he secures the squares. I will just show if the king goes backwards, you can just close your eyes and put the king on the third rank as a black, because you are sure about the standard winning position. You can go here, and maybe safer option if you don't remember, but it's equally the same if you push the pawn, because even if white gets the opposition here, opposition doesn't matter in the standard winning position where the king has reached the third square in the third rank, or if it's white with the pawn, the white king will be on the sixth rank, and that is just lost for white. So if we take a moment to remember what we have learned, the most important thing, if we put them in the order, is it an A or H pawn? If it's A or H pawn, then no chance. It's a draw. Then, the thing that comes after it is the standard winning position, not the opposition, because standard winning position is stronger. In the standard winning position, where the king has reached the 3rd or 6th rank, according to which player has the pawn, has the extra pawn, comes second. King in front of the pawn on the 3rd or 6th rank, standard winning position. After that, we have the king in front of the pawn, but the opposition really matters. We saw if it was white to play that he lost the opposition. Now it's the opposite. King in front of the pawn, not on the 6th or the 3rd rank, and it's black to move. So in this case, white has lost the opposition and will not be able to win. He will move right or left, we will face it. The pawn moves forward, we block it. And now, as we learned, we can know from here, king beside the pawn. We will not lose this position. We just go in front of the pawn, and when he forces us back, we go facing the pawn. He goes forward, we block the king, and now black is forced to do a stalemate, and the game ends at draw. So let's recap. A or H pawn, draw. Standard winning position, king on the 6th or the 3rd rank, always winning. Third, king in front of the pawn, but it depends on the opposition. If it's black to move, or the one with the pawn has to move, he will not be able to win. If it's the other side, he will lose. Then comes the king beside or behind the pawn, where the defender can easily draw the game. See you in the next chapter.